Well, good evening and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I am your host, Sandy Shellis. And tonight it is not an easy show, but we are a coffee house, so take a sip, sit back, and join up. So thanks for coming, everybody, and thank you for moderating. Bella and Kim, I see, are here, and welcome while you join. Uh, tonight, tonight's topic, not easy, but none of the topics are very easy on this channel. And we're going to talk about war, but a little differently because war is usually reported through the geopolitical lens, right? And weapons and strategy but what really does not get discussed, except maybe for on Environmental Coffee House, is the environmental cost. And I have made videos. I have made a video which I recently repackaged on the environmental cost of war. And I want to take a closer look at what this war, Iran, Lebanon, see, Iraq. I have Iraq on my mind. That's where the planes crashed. But what does it mean for the planet? What does it mean for the climate? And I have a lot of information tonight for us. So you think about this, bombed oil depots and the refineries and all those just massive plumes of smoke that go into the atmosphere, burning the petroleum infrastructure. Think of the sulfur dioxide, the soot, the metals, the heavy metals that are going into the air that's contaminating the water and the soil all across that region. All across there, and the oil fires and the spills in the Persian Gulf that threaten marine ecosystems, fisheries, seabirds, the coastal habitats, the communities that depend on clean environments for survival. Shades of the Gulf War in 1991. So I do want to talk about wildlife as well, because there are a lot of wildlife and it is a fragile ecosystem. It's a desert ecosystem and there are so many animals and they're endangered, like the Asiatic cheetah, the Persian gazelle, the Persian onager. When war ignites, the fires and contaminates the water sources and disrupts protected reserves, animals become the silent casualties. And there's the climate dimension. Military operations and the burning fuel infrastructure. Think about this. All the rebuilding of the cities that are destroyed. Look at Gaza. And how much greenhouse gas gets already added, the emissions from it all that get added to the planet. It is really not, it's not easy. And you know what? War and all of the bullshit that goes along with it, it really doesn't get counted into these climate calculations, but it has a gigantic footprint. How long have we been talking about this? So I want to take a look at a lot of this. And I want to have an honest conversation. And I have a fantastic article. I have 2 interviews keyed up to show you. And I'm not sure where I want to start. But I think I'm going to start with the recent strikes. And I think I'm going to start with white phosphorus because that's been on my mind. And we'll talk about Lebanon first. The white phosphorus, because Israel has used it, and it's against the law. I mean, it's against the law of war. It's not something you should be doing. But what does white phosphorus do? You see how it looks. It ignites instantly. When it contacts with oxygen, it burns at very, very high temperatures. It continues burning inside of humans' tissue. Think of the animals. And it does start fire in vegetation and the buildings. It's horrible. How are they doing this? Why are they doing this in Lebanon? So it can be legally used. Actually, white phosphorus can be legally used, but for smoke screens or certain types of illumination, but you're using it over a populated area and it is widely considered illegal under international law, international humanitarian law. So how does this happen? Because of lawlessness, because the Netanyahu government is a right-wing government of messianic right-wing Zionists that don't care. And they want to keep going, and they dragged the United States in because Donald Trump is a weak, spineless, clueless moron, basically. And they've been wanting to do this for years. How many times have we said it? Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. And it sure as shit is not anti-Semitic to talk about Israel and criticize their government. So what does the phosphorus do? It contaminates soil, the groundwater, and it poisons the wildlife. It's absolutely horrible. Look how it looks. It burns forests, farmland. And you know what? It's toxic residues. And in southern Lebanon alone now, the previous use of these munitions destroyed thousands of hectares of forest and agricultural land. So it is a chemical wildfire weapon. It's terrible. And the picture I just put up is some of the damage to the olive trees, the olive location. So really, we've got a real clusterfuck here. We do. And it's disgusting. It makes me sick. And I have to tell you guys, I'm not feeling good when I read all this. This was a hard show because there's something recent that happened, and I'm going to show you in a little bit, that happened it's called Keg Island. But let's go on because my notes are in order, and I worked hard like usual on all of this. I want to talk about now the oil infrastructure bombing. and climate and toxic pollution, which happens. It's a huge impact of this war, and its attacks on the oil depots and the refineries. We can go back to the original one. What does it say? It says it's raining oil. In Tehran, 9 million people are living under a sky black with toxic smoke after U.S. Israeli strikes bombed fuel depots across the capital. Oil flooding the streets. People breathing this. Trump has blood on his hands. Human and ecological. This is an environmental catastrophe. It's all an environmental catastrophe. All of it. Every single stinking war. Every single one. And I've lived through many of them. And that's what it looks like, the bombing of the oil wells. It's just awful. And these fires after that, the fires release hydrocarbons and sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, heavy metals, and soot, all of that together. And then when the rain passes through these plumes, it's acid rain. That contaminates the soils and the crops. Think about it. And then the residents have to live in the city. They can't even breathe. The pictures that I saw were just absolutely tragic, actually. It was tragic. And I didn't want to put all of them up because I really didn't want to make everybody that upset. Because they are upsetting. And I had been looking at stuff from the Gulf War in 1991. And every single one. But this is it's pretty bad now. And then, war is a climate driver, obviously. And as I said before, it doesn't get counted really in the climate accounting. I don't know if it ever was at any of the COPs. I don't know. I didn't get that far into my, the research, and it's a lot to put this together to find all these articles and then do it. But I want to bring you as good and comprehensive of a show as I can. And I really do appreciate that there are, on a Friday night, for something I've worked so hard on, 28 of you and a few on Twitter. Good. It doesn't matter. I do it for education, and that's why I'm here. But we have known that military activity, the percentage that I came up with was 5.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's like more than civilian aviation and shipping combined, friends. Combined. So in this conflict, this particular conflict, we have direct emissions with burning oil facilities. And we have the fuel that's used by the jets and the ships just for this. Missile launches, explosions, all of it. And indirect emissions, rebuilding destroyed cities. Think about the rebuilding process. Look what Jared Kushner's doing in Gaza. They're talking about rebuilding. Gaza Riviera, Manufacturing new weapons. And it's the same shit in Ukraine. They're making cheap drones. In fact, Saudi Arabia is now asking Ukraine to buy drones from them. That's something, right? And then comes the refugee crisis. So it really is an industrial production at maximum intensity. And then we'll move on to water and marine ecosystem damage. Now, the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea are extremely fragile ecosystems. Let's take a quick look. Let me get this. I want to go over to, hang on. I'm going to go over to my other screen, which is not changing very fast. We're having a snowstorm, by the way, so okay, we're going to look at the map. It may be a little redundant from the show I did with Antonio, but I just want to show you the map, and I don't know if my pointer is working. Okay, so here's the straight. This is the this is where everything's happening here, and you see all these little lands. There's Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and it goes out into the Arabian Sea. Let's see. Look at that. Look at that. Look at this. Let's get bigger, and we can look at. It's such a fragile ecosystem, this Persian Gulf. It really is. It's very fragile. It's very fragile. And it's so sad that we're really going to destroy it even worse than it's been destroyed already. Well, let me go back because I'll finish with my notes. And then we have an incredible article. I do. I have an incredible article and a video. But we're going to do this. And I'm not in a hurry. I'm really not in a hurry. And if you can't stay, I'll probably cut it up into pieces. So these things are fragile, these ecosystems. And you saw it. And these military strikes and these tankers, they risk massive oil spills. And we've seen it before. Contamination of the desalination plants. Antonio and I had talked about it. Damage to coral reefs. Now, in that area, they have some very, very heat-resistant coral reefs. But for how long are they going to even be able to handle the assault that's happening there with all of these ships being blown up, right? Poisoning the fisheries also. And scientists warn about this. They're warning that these attacks on the refineries and tankers could contaminate marine ecosystems across the Gulf. Duh. So during that the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, oil pollution in the Gulf nearly wiped out some of the sea turtle population. So what do you think is going to happen now? What do you think is going to happen this time? It's a larger regional war. It's starting. I mean, Iran is bombing the Gulf states because they don't want the United States military to be in the Gulf states. They want their brothers and sisters to be with them, is how I look at it. And they have made that very abundantly clear. So the soil and the soil toxicity, long-term land damage. I mean, bombing leaves behind a toxic chemical landscape. And where people grow food, there is food being grown. There's olive trees, but all that debris, again, with the heavy metals and all the explosive bullshit that has gone all over. And think about the rocket propellants. What propels the rockets? And that brings PFAS and the burned petroleum products. It's just a lovely toxic cocktail, isn't it? Cocktail, anyone. And these substances, they're going to seep right down into the soil and the groundwater, and it's going to be there for decades because the stuff from the Gulf War has probably not even cleaned up yet, and that's decades already. And we're going to see their agricultural land is going to become unusable, and food systems will collapse if this keeps going. But then there's the wildlife who are really the silent casualties. Like the wildlife, that is actually in the Strait of Hormuz, the corals there. And you think about this. The ecosystems, the forests, they're going to be burned. They get burned by the incendiary weapons and all of the rivers and the wetlands. Oh, God. And from the original bullshit here and blowing up the oil wells, right? There's going to be the oil-coated birds and marine mammals once again. Once again, There will be. So again, it's just more habitat destruction. War zones become dead zones for biodiversity. And then there's the good old climate feedback loop. Oh, yeah. Let me shut this one off. We'll move into another picture of the Hormuz, where the Hormuz, that land around the Hormuz. So here we are with a feedback loop, because war is a feedback loop. Another one, the climate stress. Now, climate stress is already affecting the Middle East, which we know because Tehran, what was in the news before this? Tehran having water shortages. They were going to run out of water for millions of people, having problems. They're suffering from extreme heat. They're suffering from water scarcity. They're suffering from desertification. Desertification. War damages the water systems and those power grids and agriculture. It accelerates the climate vulnerability across the region. So war and climate, what does that equal, friends? Systemic instability, which is what's happening. So we move on to that concept of ecocide. I use that word. We have used that word because it is real. And there are environmental scholars that argue that this large-scale environmental destruction during war should be treated as a crime, the crime of ecocide, because of the poisoning, because of the killing, because of the, and it's of course the human toll is awful, but the environmental damage lasts so much longer than the war. We know this. It's ecocide. That's what it is. And the bombs just don't hit the cities, folks. They don't. They hit the atmosphere and the oceans and the forests, the farmland, the wildlife, and the climate system itself. So there you go. That's my opening. So much fun. So much fun. And then I'm going to move on to, I pretty much think I'm going to move on to an article that I have, but I really do want to talk about the animals too. I do, because they have some, no, let's talk about the animals really quickly here. They're beautiful. There's one called the Asiatic cheetah. I'll just show you one more picture of that's the water. That's what is in the strait. The fishies, right? So there is an Asiatic cheetah. It is a beautiful, beautiful animal. And there's only about a dozen of these. And they're in Iran. And they live in protected desert reserves, but war doesn't care about protection. So what's going to happen to them? They're beautiful. And then there are the Persian gazelles. They're also in Iran, and war threatens them because they're all over. You know how where we live or where you live, you see the deer in the city, or you see the deer, you see the losing habitat. Well, it's not as chronic in Iran, but what happens to these guys? Landmines, explosions and fires, and the grazing areas are destroyed. And of course, military activity and wildlife reserves, because there is no line. They don't care. They don't care. And then there's one more guy I wanted to introduce you to, the Persian onager, which is the wild desert donkey. And it's the same thing. This is an endangered species unique to Iran. And again, the same shit. The war with them is the migratory routes for them. And again, the destruction of their habitat is the same clusterfuck for all of the wildlife. And it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. And it really hurts. It hurts. And all of us here, all of us in this, on my YouTube channel with Tonio and Nicholas and who come up, we all love animals. And we know that in Lebanon also there are so many rare, so many more. There's birds and wetland species. And the birds, the smoke affects them from the fires and the explosions. Contamination of the wetlands where the wetlands and the rivers, the birds eat somewhere. All of the destruction. And think about this with the birds. Military noise. Even in the cities. In Lebanon, the rocket strikes and the forest fires have destroyed the woodland habitat used by a lot of migratory birds. It's happening now again. And then there's the marine life. And one of the biggest environmental risks of the conflict is oil pollution in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, which we looked at. And this, who this threaten on this? Whales and porpoises and sea turtles and seabirds. And I showed you the coral reefs. I've showed you and the fish populations. I don't know where the fish was. I know I had one more fish. Reptiles too. There's a lot of reptiles there. And the river species. The Euphrates soft shell turtle. They're endangered. They live in river systems connected in Iran. And amphibians and reptiles in the marshlands. The oil contamination and the heavy metals and poison aquatic ecosystem. It'll poison it for years and years. And in Lebanon, in the Lebanese forests, because they'll go out and bomb more of Lebanon. It won't be just kept to the city. There's foxes and wild boar and jackals and the raptors and, of course, more migratory birds. And as they, historically, all the bombing in Lebanon has totally burned orchards and forest ecosystems. So you take away the nesting areas and the food sources. And scientists are saying that the war is already causing widespread pollution incidents and ecosystem damage across the region. It's already happening. And I do have the video I'm going to show you. But I did want to mention something about the mangrove forest too, because I've already talked about the coral reef. But the mangrove forests are along the coastline of Iran, Oman, and the UAE. And these are the trees that thrive in salty tidal environments, and they create such a complex root system. They're really incredible. The mangroves, they are breeding grounds for fish and shrimp, and shelter for juvenile marine animals, and nesting for birds, and protection from coastal erosion, and they are powerful carbon sinks. But, even if they store large amounts of carbon in their soils, when the oil contamination hits, game over. It coats the roots and it suffocates the trees and it destroys the entire coastal ecosystem. And it takes decades to recover, and we were still seeing them recovering. And the same thing with the seagrass meadows, which is the picture I had of the seagrass meadows. Let me see which one. Nope, that was the fish. There, those are the seagrass meadows. And people don't talk about them very often, but these are incredible. They go underneath and also above, and they're food for the sea turtles, and they're habitat for the fish nurseries, and they're feeding grounds for these little things called dugongs, which are little marine herbivores. Herbivores similar to manatees. They're not so little. Okay, but they're similar. And the Persian Gulf is one of the world's largest population of dugongs. It's so sad, you know? And the Strait of Hormuz being famous for energy shipping, but really ecologically it's just as important, and it's going to be destroyed. It's just going to be destroyed. And so many species depend on these ecosystems. It makes you so sick. So many, and I've already told you how many, but all of this is such a threat to the ecosystems. It's unfathomable, but it's happening. And it's happening. And it's happening at breakneck speed right now. So I think I'm going to show you a video of a scientist. I have a couple. Let's start out with this video. Hang on, and I'll set it up.
Now I want to bring in Mohammed Mahmud. He leads the Middle East Climate and Water Policy Wing of the United Nations University Institute of Water, Environment and Health. Dr. Mahmud, we have ships burning in the Gulf, oil facilities attacked by apparently all parties across several countries. What does all this burning oil do to the air people breathe?
Well, now we're dealing with issues of contamination, as you said, across air, land, and sea. Obviously, tankers or oil refineries or infrastructure that's situated by the ocean or the sea, I should say, in this case, obviously has the risk of having these oil spills, which was just reported on. And of course, that has a direct effect on marine life. But also when you think about impact of air quality, right? So we saw those gigantic black plumes over Iran. Now you're shifting to a public health issue. People are inhaling these vapors that are toxic. That's going to cause increase in respiratory illness, and if untreated, of course, could lead to fatalities. The other aspect of oil refineries or oil-producing infrastructure that's being struck is not just if it spills, obviously, over the sea. We've talked about those tankers, but if it does cause a huge oil spill over land, now we can see some contamination into the soil. Obviously, that's detrimental in terms of plant life, wildlife that feeds on it. But even more alarming, or it's all alarming really, but even more alarming concern is what if that oil leak or spill infiltrates deeper into the soil? Now you're starting to impact groundwater, which, as you know, is a very finite resource in the region.
We're going to come to water in a moment, but first, tanker movements through the Gulf have been repeatedly disrupted, and some attacks have come dangerously close to loaded vessels. If an oil tanker was severely damaged or sunk, what level of environmental contamination could we expect? Would it be like the Exxon Valdez or Brent Spar, previous oil disasters that we've experienced?
Yeah, well, the extent of the contamination really also depends on what the vessel is carrying and how much of it. So at a very basic minimum, if it's just the vessel itself, the debris is going to cause a lot of issues in terms of physically impacting marine life. There's coral reefs, not just in terms of fisheries, which is a huge component of food security in the region, very dependent on fish as a food supply. But then when you add to it potential toxic elements like vessels that are carrying oil, heavy metals, now you're not just causing damage, but you're accelerating the fatalities of these fish species. And then that obviously cascades to secondary effects of food supply coming from that source.
Now, also, we're coming back to the water issue that you've mentioned earlier. Desalination plants in Gulf states have reportedly been targeted by Iran, and they could also be affected by pollution from oil spills. How important are these desalination plants in terms of being civilian infrastructure?
They are absolutely the lifeline of those countries that are dependent on it because of how much of their water supply comes from desalination, because they really don't have any other renewable freshwater sources. There's really no surface systems, at least in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. And groundwater is a very finite, non-renewable resource because there's not a lot of precipitation that happens, and artificial recharge into those aquifers doesn't happen at a robust level to sort of mitigate the excessive pumping. So when you strike the desalination infrastructure, now you're really affecting those countries' abilities to leverage water, not just for civilian needs in terms of human consumption, residential use, etc., but also for their socioeconomic capacity to grow and thrive. Water is an input into things like energy production. It's an input into food security. It's an input into industrial growth, manufacturing, etc. So there's first level, second level, third level effects that are hugely detrimental to civilian populations.
Now, what can be done to protect these resources?
Well, there's the acute response, right? So I don't think a lot of folks anticipated that improving water security in the region would also include mitigating against direct military attack. I think that's sort of a new threat to consider. But the region itself, to be fair, has long grappled with this idea of how to improve their water security and their water reliability because it is a naturally arid and hot region with limited freshwater resources. Hence why they've leveraged desalination heavily and quite early because of the absence of other supplies. And there's exploration to other technologies that look towards improving their water resources reliability. Wastewater reuse, water recycling is a growing component. It's still quite small in terms of a water source for those countries, but that's an element, as well as looking at other technologies that look to either increase water resources from available supply or actually more effectively to improve water efficiency, to reduce the water footprint of those water uses, whether it's coming from sectors like agriculture or industry, or even the much smaller human footprint of drinking water needs. But now when you factor in infrastructure being directly attacked, that completely changes the calculus on how to respond more effectively to that. And I think that's an ongoing issue to be resolved.
Mohammed Mahmud there, the United Nations University Institute of Water Environment.
Yeah, I liked that one. That's why I showed it. I really did. I have to move on. I do have articles, and I do have one video I haven't actually set up, but I thought maybe I would show this really quickly because I thought this one was pretty good.
You're looking at an Israeli military aircraft spraying a cancer-linked herbicide on farmlands in southern Lebanon, which is both an environmental and health crime. And that's not the only toxic chemical they're poisoning Lebanon with. This picture shows what Human Rights Watch says is evidence that Israel used white phosphorus in residential areas also in southern Lebanon earlier this month. So what do these chemicals actually do? Well, glyphosate is actually banned in several countries because its severe risks to water, soil, crops, and human health. This footage from early February shows the highly toxic chemical, which Lebanese authorities have indicated as glyphosate, being sprayed over agriculture areas in the border village of El Bustan. And days before Israel sprayed toxic chemicals across Lebanon, Israeli planes were seen in Syria spraying agriculture areas on 3 separate occasions within 1 week. Lab samples showed that Israel was using glyphosate concentrations 20 to 30 times higher than normal. This means severe devastation to vegetation that was already degraded by Israel's unlawful use of white phosphorus. Lebanon's president condemned Israel's act as a violation of Lebanese sovereignty that threatens the country's food security and farmers' livelihoods. Experts say Israel has a history of making southern Lebanon uninhabitable, similar to its actions in Gaza and the occupied West Bank.
It just angers you so much how one country has become so ugly and has dragged the United States, which has always had problems. I mean, we've bombed everywhere. We have destroyed, we have killed, we have done so much. We have we have been such a colonial settler country, and Israel just doesn't stop. And they feel justified because the Israelis that support Netanyahu and the right wing feel justified because of what they perceive as all the wrongs that have been done to their country, to their people for 47 years since they made Israel a thing. And it's a very delicate situation because there's a lot of arguing, and I have been on my Political Coffee House X channel kind of telling these people that, you know, I'm sorry, but you haven't learned the lesson of the Holocaust at all and become like this. It's just really, really upsetting. So let me move to my other screen share. Hang on. I honestly don't know why it takes so long. I really don't know why there's such a lag. I have to find out. It should just go so easily. Okay, so we moved there. We moved from there. I think I'm going to show you what's happening on X really quick, if I can find it. All right, because this upset me today, and so okay. So before I did my show, I saw this on X, and this is what Donald Trump said. He's insane. Okay. Moments ago, at my direction, the United States Central Command executed one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East and totally obliterated every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Karg Island. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known, but for reasons of decency, he is not decent any fucking way whatsoever. I have chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. However, should Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will immediately reconsider this decision. During my first term and currently, I rebuilt our military into the most lethal, powerful, and effective force by far anywhere in the world. Iran has no ability to defend anything that we want to attack. There is nothing that they can do about it. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, nor will it have the ability to threaten the United States. It wasn't going to. There were negotiations. He pulled us out of the nuclear agreement that was working. For 3 years, it was working. He says, for that matter, Iran's military and all others involved with this terrorist regime would be wise to lay down their arms and save what's left of their country, which isn't much. I can't stand him. I got so angry that my tweet back was, fuck you, Donald Trump. And then I put down the key wildlife species on Karg Island are gazelles. The island is home to a population of gazelles that thrive due to natural freshwater sources. Sea turtles, hawksbill, green sea turtles, and olive ridley turtles have been recorded in the coastal waters and on the beaches. The birds, the Indian house crow is prevalent with a large active and non-breeding population. Other birds include large white-headed seagulls and ospreys. Marine life, the surrounding waters contain fish, crabs, and sharks. Other fauna, goats, and various insects are present along with vegetation like ficus, bengalensis, and eucalyptus. So they bombed this island where there happens to be an oil installation, but Iran, and there's a lot of people that, that answered, but that Iran has taken pains to preserve the animal life, the wildlife that's on this island. And I don't know if I actually can see where this is exactly on the map. the Karg Island in Iran. It's I think it's that little thing down there, but it's not, I don't know where exactly it is. I didn't look close enough beforehand. See, there's a mangrove protected forest area there. You can see this. Look at that. And it's just heartbreaking how humanity just destroys everything. Every single thing that's good. Everything. Now, this is an article I really think I should read. It's long. So what I want to do is go through, I'm going to save it to the end. I'm going to go through one thing here. This is People's Trust for Endangered Species and Iran's Wild Frontiers, Safe Havens for Endangered Species in Iran. And so although species like the Persian leopards, Asiatic cheetahs, and Persian onagers, whose last haven has been the expanses of Iran, are endangered, we can hopefully strive for a better future for these wonderful creatures. Well, that was before this. And there's national parks. In Iran, there are 200 protected areas, which together preserve the outstanding biodiversity of the country. These protected areas and national parks encompass unbeaten paths leading to diverse ecosystems and provide incredible opportunities to observe the wildlife. So they have beautiful parks. And we know that Donald Trump has probably never seen anything more natural than AstroTurf in a fucking golf course. And I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu has seen anything much either, but desert and maybe the water. Perhaps. So researchers and rangers are trying their best to collaborate with one another to preserve and protect this valuable species and its prey. This is the Persian leopard they're talking about. And they stalk the main prey, the Ural sheep and the wild goats, usually found on the cliffs. It's a beautiful country. Go back and watch the show I did with Antonio. It's a beautiful country. Look at these pictures. Look at these pictures. It's a magnificent country. You know, their political structure sucks too. They are a repressive regime in Iran. They treat women horribly. They're not my pick of what I would like to see in Iran. But is it the United States that had to do this? Is it our job? Is it Donald Trump who gets to pick the next supreme leader of Iran? Donald Trump, who's bankrupted everything he's ever touched? That was the Golestan National Park. Iran seems like a country that would be just so beautiful to go to. Look at these beautiful, beautiful pictures. Please keep the bombs away. Please keep the bombs away. All these threats, there are poaching and illegal grazing are among the main threats that all protected areas are facing in Iran. Wildlife rangers are working closely with local herders and hunters to protect these endangered species. There was sustainable tourism, and you could go to Iran, but I doubt it anymore. I wouldn't see how that's going to happen because Americans have been poisoned to hate. Yeah, again, I said it's not a good regime. Any extremist religion is not good. Iran is an extremist Islamic religion. Israel is run now by the extremist Zionist Jewish people there. The United States is turning into a white Christian nationalist country. They're all hideous. The world would be a lot better without religion. There, I said it. So Greenpeace had a piece on how oil tankers stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, south of Iran, threatened the coast. And, you know, we've already talked about that. I've talked about it. The the scientist I showed you from the UN talked about it, and they're showing where it is, and they're talking about the several ships that have been attacked and the crude oil tanker off the coast of Kuwait. So in total, the tankers currently blocked in the Persian Gulf are carrying as least 21 billion liters of oil. What a mess! And they've blown them up already. The oil that is spilled already in the Persian Gulf is insane. It's really insane. Greenpeace Germany has analyzed the blocked Strait of Hormuz using the ship movement data and satellite imagery. And these are all of these oil-laden tankers. 85 of the large ones. A lot of oil. And in the event of a leak, it's clear the local communities would pay this additional long-term price for unlawful aggression and fossil fuel interests. An oil spill could destroy. But when was this written? Because one is already the 10th. Well, we already saw blow-ups, haven't we not? We've already seen them blow up. And so we know that it's fucked there. There's another picture of the coral reefs. Excuse my language. It is an emotional issue. When any of these things happen, any continent, anywhere. Do you know what the wildlife and the ecological damage has been in Gaza from the leveling there besides the human toll? The ocean and the debris off of Gaza that's fallen into the water? So even in peacetime, these ecosystems are exposed to extreme natural conditions. It's just awful. And of course, we all want peace. Everybody here in my chat does. Everybody wants peace. But you know, I'm doing this show and I'm showing all this amazing stuff and talking about the ecosystems, and we can't even get 100 people because, I hate to say this, people want sensationalism. And they will watch all these channels that are real hating channels, you know, and nobody gives a shit about the environment. I mean, really, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. Lebanon and Israel unlawfully using the white phosphorus. We already talked about that. So that's where we are. And I had already shared about the Karg Island, the wildlife there, and who lives there, and the status and all. So it's just heartbreaking. So maybe I can show one more interview so I can stand up and. Let me see, I have it set up here. Yeah, I'm going to show you the one more guy that I have set up. I could stand up and take a break for a minute, and we'll watch him. He's a different professor. He's from Australia. I think that you will like him as well. All right, so let's watch this. And again, I told you I had a very comprehensive show. Let's watch him.
Let's get more on this now from Dr. Gabriel da Silva. He's an associate professor and lecturer in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Melbourne. Thanks for being with us. Gabriel, we have ships burning in the Gulf, oil facilities attacked across several countries. There are reports of black rain falling in parts of Iran. What does this burning oil do to the air that people breathe? How dangerous is it?
Oh, it's a serious and real health impact that people need to be concerned about. It goes without saying, I think that it's not comparable to the immediate threat to people's lives from being in a conflict zone. But particularly when you look at this black rain that's coming down or was coming down in Tehran, when you're attacking oil depots and you have them burning in such a concentrated urban environment, you're going to be producing, particles, chemicals that you wouldn't normally find in the air. They're going to have a real impact on people's, immediate health. So, there's people that will be struggling to breathe when exposed directly to it, trigger nausea and headaches. And then there are also, long-term health impacts, which these people probably aren't thinking about right now, but, can leave a legacy in the region.
Now, oil tankers are being attacked in the Gulf. What would it mean if a fully loaded tanker were struck or sunk? What sort of environmental contamination could we expect from that?
I think we have sadly examples of this in the past. We've had tankers run aground, and we've had larger oil spills from wells that are leaking. So there's fairly well documented ecological impacts on the region that'll threaten, there particularly, the local environment and wildlife, as well as the perhaps food in the area. One of the issues with conflict and environmental issues is it's so hard to access and so hard to actually gauge the impact. So you're almost always flying blind, and to get in there and any hope of remediation at the moment is something you wouldn't even be thinking about.
Extremely difficult environment to even monitor at this point. What would you say are the main environmental dangers posed by a war like this that we're seeing?
Yeah, so you would have to look, Middle East countries that are at, or maybe not at war, but are suffering the consequences of this. You're talking about predominantly Arab nations, and they're oil-producing nations. So water security certainly is a major concern. And one of the things we're grappling with now, I suppose, is that not so much Iran, but a lot of the neighboring countries rely a lot on desalination. It's going to be something that certainly, is a critical vulnerability to nations. And then, we have the oil and gas infrastructure, as well as the transport of petroleum out of these countries. That is again perhaps a military target, but also a very sensitive one for a nation's infrastructure, and then with major potential threats to the environment.
Now, earlier this week, you wrote an article for The Conversation on this topic, pointing out that there's been growing attention focused on the environmental impact of warfare worldwide. What have we learned from past conflicts that can be applied to this one?
Well, I'd say what we know is that armed conflict does leave a real lasting environmental legacy, and that impacts the population of these countries. Where even though it's a fresh conflict, we're seeing this in Gaza right now. So we know that their supplies of clean water have been decimated, their ability to deal with sewage and other waste is non-existent, and we've already seen increases in communicable diseases in Gaza. If you look at the Middle East and the attacks on petroleum, oil and gas infrastructure, we know that following wars in Kuwait and Iran, that there were large-scale burning of oil wells, but also burn pits that the military were operating. There's real debilitating effects on returned service people that we know about here in Australia and in the US as well. If you go back further, we can think about in Vietnam, they're still grappling with the impacts of Agent Orange, spraying that defoliant or herbicide there. Yet It was a week or two ago we saw Israel spraying glyphosate, a herbicide, on one of their neighbouring nations.
Right. What steps, just briefly, what steps do you think are needed to prevent a full-scale environmental emergency in the Gulf from this war?
I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, but I think we know what should and shouldn't be targeted. Certainly water infrastructure, desalination plants, but seeing any movement there in the very short term, I don't really see a way forward.
Gabriel, thank you very much for your insights. That was Gabriel da Silva, Associate Professor of Chemical Engineering at the University of Melbourne.
Okay, I thought that was pretty interesting, and I see we had a troll. We had a troll. Yes, and you guys got rid of him right away. Thank you, because there was no talking to that one. Troll in the house. I love trolls, actually. My little collection of trolls. Okay, so I thought that was pretty good. Now, I've got an article to wrap up the show, and this guy is incredible, and I'm going to read this article. I got my little break, and I think this is important, really important. This is it's in the Pioneer. This guy has a channel with, I don't know, a couple of million people. Achara Prashant, the climate cost of the war machine, and I am going to do it. And I was thinking about doing a little music in the back, but I'm just going to do it. Here we go. Strap in, guys. There is a particular dissonance that comes with reading the news in the current age. On one page, a missile strike. On the next, a climate summit. On one channel, footage of a city under bombardment. On the next, a report on record ocean temperatures. We have learned to hold these two realities at the same time without connecting them, consuming one as geopolitics and the other as science, treating them as simultaneous emergencies that happen to share a world but not a cause. This separation is not accidental. It is one of the most consequential errors the modern mind makes, and its consequences are measured not in misunderstanding, but in carbon and blood. The refusal to see that these two crises share a root, are fed by the same engine, and cannot be solved while that engine continues to run. It is not merely an editorial convenience. It is the ego's oldest defense. Keep the problems in separate compartments, and neither will ever demand a reckoning with one who is producing both. They are not parallel catastrophes, but the same catastrophe wearing different faces. The first is familiar. A border is contested. An ideology threatens. A regime must be contained. Armies mobilized, weapons procured, and the world watches the spectacle of human beings organized to destroy each other. The second phase is slower and less dramatic. Carbon accumulating in the atmosphere. Temperatures rising by fractions of a degree each decade, coral bleaching, aquifers draining, glaciers retreating at rates that satellite data now measures with discomforting precision. These two faces belong to the same creature, the unexamined ego operating at the scale of nations, and it cannot be understood by studying the face alone. The emissions the treaties forgot. The world's militaries account for an estimated 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. To appreciate what this means, civil aviation, which most people regard as a significant climate problem and which has been the subject of intense public scrutiny and regulatory pressure, accounts for roughly 2%. The militaries of the world emit nearly 3 times as much as all the world's commercial flights combined, and this figure is almost certainly an underestimate because military emissions are the one major category of human activity that is systematically excluded from climate accounting. If all the world's militaries were counted as a single country, they would rank as the 4th highest emitter on the planet, behind only the United States, China, and India. This exclusion has deep roots. During the Kyoto Protocol negotiations of 1997, the United States pushed hard for military activity to be carved out of binding emissions targets, and it succeeded. Under the current UN climate regime, the situation has improved only marginally. Military emissions reporting by major powers remain incomplete, inconsistent, and in practice largely voluntarily. The 3 countries with the largest military establishments in the world, The United States, Russia, and China either do not report their military emissions to the United Nations at all, or do so in ways that cannot be independently verified. According to the Conflict and Environment Observatory, as of late 2025, disclosure by major military spenders remains poor and shows no meaningful sign of improvement. The gap is not a relic of less enlightened era of climate diplomacy. It is a widening as militarization rises at the precise historical moment when the urgency of a complete carbon inventory has never been greater. The world is attempting to manage a civilizational crisis with a structural blind spot at the center of its data. And that blind spot is growing. The United States military alone is the single institutional consumer of hydrocarbons on the planet. If it were a nation, its emissions would rank it 47th in the world, ahead of Portugal, Sweden, and Denmark. Between 2001 and 2018, total Pentagon emissions reached an estimated 1.3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, a figure that dwarfs almost any other single institution accounting in human history. Of this, the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Syria accounted for 440 million metric tons, with Iraq invasion alone for 250 million. To hold these numbers in perspective, 180 countries in the world would have total annual emissions below 250 million metric tons. A single invasion, measured conservatively, out-emitted the majority of the world's nations for a period of its conducts. And crucially, 2/3 of total U.S. military emissions in this period came not from active war zones, but from peacetime existence of the military machine itself. Bases, training exercises, fuel logistics, and the sprawling supply chains that feed a permanent war readiness posture. The climate does not wait for the shooting to start. When a war is actually fought, the accounting becomes staggering. 3 years of the Russia-Ukraine conflict generated 230 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, more than Spain's annual greenhouse gas output, and a figure equivalent to the combined annual emissions of Austria, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. The largest single source was warfare itself, the fuel burned by tanks and fighter jets, the manufacture and detonation of ammunition, the construction of fortifications accounting for 36% of the total. Reconstruction came at 27%, and this proportion is not incidental. Cement and steel, the two materials on which post-war rebuilding depends most heavily, are among the most carbon-intensive industrial products on Earth. Every building reduced to rubble releases the carbon locked into its construction, and the energy required to manufacture its replacement releases a comparable quantity again. The world's carbon trail extends further still. Assessments of Ukraine's total war footprint include emissions from rerouted commercial flights forced to avoid conflict airspace, fires ignited by strikes on industrial and energy infrastructure, and the long-burning release of carbon from oil and gas systems hit by bombardment. War does not merely burn fuel in tanks and jets. It disrupts, ignites, and reroutes entire energy systems, none of which appears in any country's climate commitments. Meanwhile, the first 15 months of Israel's bombardment of Gaza generated an estimated 32 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, roughly equal to Croatia's entire annual emissions, a figure that does not include the emissions that reconstruction will eventually require. Ukraine has quantified the climate damage from Russia's aggression at over $42 billion and intends to seek reparations on this basis, inaugurating what may become a new chapter in international climate law. And all of this is happening while military spending is accelerating. Global military expenditure reached $2.7 trillion in 2024, a 9.4% increase from the previous year, and the steepest annual rise since the Cold War. The world is spending more on instruments of destruction at the precise historical moment when the cost of the spending, measured in atmospheric carbon and diverted climate finance, has never been higher. The same engine running both. The richest nations of the world spend 30 times more on their militaries than on climate finance for the countries most vulnerable to climate breakdown. UNEP estimates that developing countries will need up to $387 billion annually by 2030 simply to adapt to the climate damage already locked in. That sum is less than 15% of what the world spent on military budgets in 2024. A relatively modest reallocation of what the world spends on preparing for war could cover the full adaptation needs of the most vulnerable nations on Earth. The money exists. The political will does not. Because the political will is being consumed by the same appetite that is generating the emissions. The opportunity cost is not only financial. Research on employment consistently shows that military spending produces an average of $5 per $1 million invested, roughly compared to roughly 13 in education, 99 in healthcare, and 6 to 8 in clean energy and infrastructure. The same expenditure redirected towards the energy transition would generate more than twice the employment while reducing emissions that the military is simultaneously producing. The security argument for the military prioritization turns out, on close examination, to purchase less security than the alternative it displaces, whether the alternative is measured in stable employment, climate resilience, or megatons of avoided carbon. That ego, the ego that launches a war and the ego that cannot stop burning carbon, are not two different egos with different problems. They are the same ego with the same problem: the refusal to identify with anything beyond the immediate boundary of the self. Whether that self is called a nation, a civilization, a generation, or simply the quarterly earnings of the cycle. Both the warmonger and the climate indifferent consumer are running the same program. Consume, expand, secure. Do not look at the cost. The military-industrial complex and the fossil fuel complex are not separate systems that happen to cause overlapping damage. They are the same system, the organized institutional expression of what an unexamined ego does when it reaches civilization scale, embedded in the same governments, funded by the same tax revenues, and defended by the same rhetoric of necessity and security. When a government argues that it cannot reduce military spending because security is under threat, and simultaneously agrees that it cannot fund climate adaptation at the required level because resources are constrained, it is not making two separate arguments. It's making one argument: the present emergency, viable and named and emotionally galvanizing, must take priority over the slower, more abstract, more inconvenient emergency whose gravest consequences fall on populations in other countries and on generations not yet born, neither of whom have a vote in its elections. This is not a failure of reason, but a structural feature of the ego's operation. The ego will not sustain attention on what does not immediately threaten it. It is not that it cannot. It is that looking honestly at the slow emergency would require it to look at itself. This is why the climate crisis, which is a present tense emergency by every scientific measure, is treated in the political calendar as a future problem, while each new military crisis is treated as requiring immediate and unlimited response. There is also a feedback loop that the standard analysis does not capture. Wars produce emissions. These emissions accelerate climate change, and climate change destabilizes regions, depletes water and agricultural resources, and generates the conditions of scarcity and displacement that have historically functioned as accelerants of conflict. The war does not end when the shooting stops. It continues in the atmosphere, warming the planet that the next generation of belligerents will inherit, primed for the next conflict by the environmental damage the previous one left behind. This is not a hypothesis. Researchers studying the Ukraine conflict have noted explicitly that the war is exacerbating the very climate conditions, drought, heat, extremes, increased fire risk, that will make the region's recovery harder. Climate change creates conditions for conflict. War accelerates climate change. The cycle tightens with each iteration. The accounting that is never done. Wars are said to be fought out of necessity, and that necessity is real enough and the ego experiences it. Security is under threat. The adversary is not similarly restrained. Survival requires force. None of this is being denied. What is being asked is something simpler and more uncomfortable, whether a civilization conducting an honest accounting of what it spends and what it produces would be willing to include in every military budget the atmospheric cost of what is being burned and destroyed. Whether the necessity that justifies the war also justifies the silence about what the war costs the planet. Whether the same governments that cannot fund adaptation at $387 billion can explain why they can sustain military budgets of $2.7 trillion. That accounting is not being done. The absence is not accidental. Military exemptions are exempt from the frameworks that govern every other source of human carbon output. The countries most responsible for global warming are the same countries that dominate global military spending. The carbon released by 3 years of war in Ukraine, 15 months of bombardment in Gaza, it appears in no nation's Paris Agreement commitments. The emissions from the weapons manufactured and shipped and detonated from the cities reduced to rubble and eventually rebuilt, from the rerouted flights and burning pipelines and stuck refineries, none of this appears in the ledger against which the world measures its progress towards the temperature targets it has set itself. This is not bureaucratic failure, but ego's oldest and most consistent maneuver, the refusal to be the object of its own scrutiny. Every accounting system reflects the priorities of one doing the accounting. A system that accounts for the carbon in a return flight to London, but not for the carbon in a sortie over the conflict zone, is a system organized around the protection of certain categories of human activity from the consequences of their own costs. It is the same refusal that prevents the individual ego from looking honestly at its own motivations, scaled up to the level of international law. The peace that follows a war is not peace. It is the interval during which the damage accumulates in forms that do not yet have names, in parts of the atmosphere, in ecosystems that in long-term health of populations exposed to the toxic legacy of what was burned and detonated before the next occasion for conflict presents itself. The climate accounting that is avoided is not merely a statistical gap. It is a mirror that, if held up honestly, would show the full cost of the life a civilization has chosen and demand an answer to the question it has always preferred to leave unasked. What exactly are we defending, and from what, and at what cost, and to whom? What you read about military budgets and feel underneath the numbers, a quiet reassurance, your interests protected. Notice what that feeling is made of. It is made of the same material that the ego has always used to make its case. The present threat, vivid and nameable, against the future cost, slow and statistical, and happening to someone else first. The ego that will not conduct an honest account of its own costs is not a problem confined to governments and militaries. It is the individual ego operating at its own scale, consuming what it consumes and sanctioning what it sanctions without looking at the ledger it is helping to fill. The governments that refused to account for military emissions did not arrive from nowhere. They were elected, tolerated, and applauded by people running the same program of exemption on a smaller scale. That question, honestly pursued, is more dangerous to the ego than any weapon. And so it goes unasked, and the carbon accumulates, and the temperature rises, and the next war begins. Ashara Prashant is a teacher and author whose work centers on self-inquiry and its applications to contemporary life. And I thought that was incredible. That was incredible. And thank you for being with me. And thank you for listening, because I really, 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 really liked it. And I watched a video that he made, and it was quite good. But I really didn't think that I should play it, because that might have been, it might have definitely been, it could have been a copyright. So I did not. Okay, well, it's been a hell of a show, and I want to thank you all for coming. There is a super chat. Thank you very, very much for that. Thank you. Solidarity and peace. That's beautiful. Helps this channel. Helps for all the things I need to do for this channel. And I basically really am grateful. I will be back on Sunday morning with Antonio. I believe he will be with me this week. I'm considering a show tomorrow on Political Coffee House, depending on my level of tiredness. I have a meeting in the morning. And look at that. We kept this less than an hour and a half. And let me see a couple of comments here. We've got two tribes. We got the bomb. Yeah, sock it to me biscuits. Now, are we living in a land where sex and horror are the new gods? Yeah. Absolutely. Well, our groundwater in Florida is already poisoned, which begs the question, where do we get safe food at all anymore? Even my cats know all the food is poisoned. Thank you, Dawn. I know. I do know. Oh, wow, what a show. Please share. Please subscribe. Please like. You can always buy me a coffee. Thank you, everybody. You are all amazing. Na, 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 na.